Hello everyone, and welcome to the third session of a four-session today, in which we plan to introduce you to the Microsoft Azure Defender for IoT. We started off with Joe presenting the OT and IoT networks and the security hazards that they impose on us today. And we just completed a session given by Ariel demonstrating the product and what we offer as the solution to the threats presented by Joe. And next I will go and I will present to you the more experienced part of the solution and how we go about deploying the solution that Ariel suggested and how easy it is. Later to be followed by a session by Yossi, who will describe the integration part into SIM and other applications that are relevant to our ecosystem. So my name is Amir Sternberg. I'm with the Microsoft Azure Defender for IoT team. I've been so in the last year. I bring with me some experience in the telecommunication industry and the project management. And with that, we will start our session. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the live Q&A channel, and we'll answer them once they come on. So, starting to talk about from planning to deployment, the main focus of this presentation is to share with you our experience. While the first instance that was given by Joe talked about the knowledge about the industry, about the challenges that they present, and the second session given by Ariel described the solution in a technical aspect, my session is all about experience. The goal of this session is to exemplify and explain to you how simple it is, though technical, our solution is to deploy in the environment of the customer. I'll try to season the presentation with plenty of examples from my actual experience, mine and my peers, and we'll try to answer any question on how the various deployment scenarios that are being challenged today are being answered by our ever-changing product. Bearing in mind that today's environment is constantly changing. The world we have known all too best a year ago is not what we're facing today. And we'll try also to address these challenges as we come forward with them. So in terms of agenda, we'll start off with reviewing some of the key success factors to a successful deployment and what is the main achievable goals that you need to keep in mind in order to make a project successful. And then I'll take you down the path from a plan to a deployment process, detailing all the various steps that you need to take. Now, I will put and emphasize some of the steps while some of them should be self-explanatory. If you do have questions about them, please feel free to interject those questions. We will also talk about organizational changes that might affect the Azure Defender deployment. Not a single deployment is similar to another. There are various challenges that are unique to one industry or to one culture or to one environment that are not available to another one. And we'll try to address some of those. I will also explain the importance of a RACI model and how it serves the implementation process throughout the deployment. We will discuss briefly some of the deployment strategies. We will review deployment strategy between on-site and remote with, of course, a specific emphasis to remote with the current challenges coming onto our world. And we will also talk about some of the key takeaways that we have in terms of how we go on in producing and deploying our product in a live environment. There's no real presentation without some acronyms. Microsoft, as any other company, likes to use acronyms, although these acronyms are not Microsoft specifics. These acronyms are used in this presentation, and they just highlight some of the project lifecycle instances and acronyms that will be used throughout them. I do assume that most of you know all of them, but this is out here just for your reference in case you will need them. So if I'd have to put and answer the question, what are the key success factors for any project? I would definitely choose these three. First of all is diligent project planning. This is just a sentence out there and anyone can interpret it to the best of their knowledge. But diligent project planning means that you really need to plan ahead. You need to understand all the process steps and decide how you take them one through another. Establish gateways between each of the steps and make sure those gateways are answered diligently between going on from one to another. The second pillar, which is just as important, is expectation settings. I can't emphasize enough how much expectation settings among all the stakeholders is key. Again, some of you can say, well, this is obvious, expectation settings is obvious, but in our system, when expectation settings are not set out verbally and writtenly and are agreed upon, they are open to interpretation, which always causes a lot of confusion and a lot of misalignment later down the road. So in every step of the process, in step number one about project planning, you need to understand and to control what are the expectations between all the parties. It can be between the customer and the partner, and between internal customers, even so, between IT and OT, and so on. And of course, communication. As in any process that has to be deployed among various stakeholders, communication is key. Continuous communication, understanding when to communicate, what information to communicate. The need for security is evident. By now, after Joe's presentation, I'm convinced that everybody is aware that security is a hazard that needs to be addressed. Now, communicating the resolution to that security hazard is a must in any project. Each of the person who's involved in the company needs to know and understand their significant role in securing the information in their company. Using our product and deploying it correctly allows them to use our tools to benefit from that and to do that more effectively. In the next slides, which I will present the deployment process, I will try to use the same structure so it will be evident throughout each one of the steps. We will discuss entry criteria. How do we go about entering a step? What are the different dependencies between the different paths that are interconnected to the same process? What are the deliverables that needs to be accumulated for each one of the processes, and what is the success criteria? What defines the process as successful and being able to move on to the next one, or needs to be further worked on, further revised, etc. So, Defender for IoT in 9 steps. That's 9 steps. How come 9 steps? Because that's the way it's easy for me to explain that. Can it be in 3 steps? It can. It can be in 1 step. It can be in 5 steps. The reason I'm saying it and I'm displaying it this way is because I broke it up into nuggets that, in my experience, deliver the most significant and accurate information for each one of the stakeholders. Now, this really depends on the industry or the customer to save mind and how he works with a project plan. So keep in mind, while we review these steps and these tasks, it can easily be broken into different number of tasks as long as all of these information processes are being delivered in the entire project lifecycle. So we will start off with a kickoff meeting. We'll go through site allocation, site architecture review, gathering site information, doing site configuration, the actual site deployment, fine-tuning it, an additional 2 processes, which are central management deployment and SOC enablement, which are not a must in every deployment, but have their benefits, and I will demonstrate once we get to them. So without further ado, we will go into the first step, which is the kickoff meeting. The flowchart of a kickoff meeting is very simple. Once you ignite with a software, with an SOW, which is signed, you will be able to do a kickoff meeting, okay? Once the scope of work is defined, you can allocate the different participants. Now, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to allocate the right participants. And let me present to you what are the key deliverables and what are the success criteria, and also point out later what is the exact key takeaway that I want you to take from it. So in terms of deliverables, we have a kickoff meeting date. We have to understand we're working cross-regional, sometimes cross-continents. Time zone is into effect. We need to understand what is the best kickoff meeting date and time to allocate for all the adjoining parties. Define the scope. Who needs to be in the scope? What processes? What do we want to discuss? What we want to achieve with it? Project introduction. This is going to be the first time, maybe the first time, that the customer is going to be oriented with us and our solution. So delivering a little bit about the project and what it involves holds a true benefit to any successful project. And then go detailedly into the process and how to review it. What are the milestones, who needs to participate, and so on and so forth. In order to achieve a successful criteria to exit this gate, you need to complete the kickoff meeting, and you have to have all the team introduced. You have to have the project scope agreed on, and agreed is an official commitment from the customer that everything that is inside the project meeting is indeed what needs to be there and is acceptable by the customer, and of course a timeline. So the timeline might be the baseline for changes later down the road. A exemplary guideline of a time project is a must. A key to delivering the project with the right people is map team roles and responsibilities. The expert tip that I can share on this is to make sure that the correct people and stakeholders are in this meeting, okay? Because in different companies and in different industries, there is different segmentation between IT and OT. And as Joe exemplified in his presentation, sometimes in any organization, there is tension between those parts. Sometimes OT do not have any information and any knowledge about security hazards. These are OT engineers who come from OT background, while the IT engineers have significant knowledge in these security assets. Now they have to work together. The mutual work between those two teams are the success for this project, because one brings the practical part of the security and the other the challenges of the OT. Only a successful combination of them both, and also understanding the roles and responsibility of each one throughout the process, will prove this to be a success. Discussing about organizational changes that occur in the life cycle of a deployment stage, because a deployment stage is not something that starts in one day and ends after a week. Through the processes that we described, it can hold a couple of processes that might have benefits to hold them across a larger time scale, which requires executive sponsorship. Who is the person who is going to sponsor you from the customer, who is going to make sure that the doors are open for you, that any concern that you will have the right people to address him. Any project of this size is costly, so there is and must be a proven commitment from the management to sponsor the project. There needs to be mutual accountability. There is accountability on the partner side and on the implementer side for bringing the solution into the site, into the customer side, but that there is also a partnership from the customer, ensuring and enabling that any resources, any constraints that are being derived from the deployment themselves are answered adequately and not pushed back and saying, well, we bought this project, really you need to make this happen. Though this situation might happen as well. Organizational alignment workshops are a part of the solution that allows us to build a strong project team, that allows us to identify who are those early adopters who will more likely to use the system, to implement them, to create those reports and to send them up to the CISO level, so they will be more familiar and more receptive of the benefits that we bring onto the table. The earlier that you identify them, the earlier that you introduce this to them and keep an open ear to their needs and requests, the stronger the relationship is and the shorter the turnaround on the deployment of the process will be. And always try to identify as early as possible logistic issues, technology issues, process issues. In logistic issues, there's really no need to describe anything more than what we've been going through in the last 9 months or so with COVID. How are we going to get on site? How are we going to deploy the system? Who's going to be out there? Other logistic issues can be in one of our customers. He has a site which is close to the end of the world nowhere. And the only way to reach it is by a helicopter, and that's only in a certain time of the year because of weather conditions. So these are a part of the situations that you need to take into mind. Technology issues, as Joe exemplified in his presentations, OT networks, a part of them are really an old system bringing a lot of old legacy equipment, and sometimes also the networking equipment is positioned in a network in such a way that provides a little bit of a challenge. So you need to identify them early on. And of course, process issues like downtime and other processes that are related needs to be acknowledged as early on. Now, talking about site allocation, in the different industries with the different customers that we are working with, we see different type of customers from different industries like automotive, pharmaceuticals, energy, and so on and so forth. In each of those sites, we understand the security is a must for the entire customer deployment, and it involves many different sites. We want to get in the early part a site pool that will allow us a maneuverability between those different sites, because we need to understand that each site presents its own challenges. So if I'd have to look at what are the deliverables and what are the success criteria, I would emphasize that a key deliverable are a list of the sites and the contacts in each of the sites, and we need to make sure that those contacts are reachable and are aware that they are a part of this project. We need to create an onboarding kit, how we onboard the site onto this project. We need to have an assigned site team, and we need to introduce this project to the site. The success criteria is quite exemplified as shown here. That the site is committed, we have a green light, and we can go along with it. Now, a good site pool is the key, because we know where we enter, we don't know how we get out of it. In some situation, we started off with one site having all the green indicators, all of a sudden to have realized that the site has unexpected maintenance or window that was called upon them, which makes them ineligible to work within that certain time frame. So having a good site pool that allows you diversification between your alternatives gives you the flexibility that is so much needed in working this project lifecycle plan. Site architecture review. This is one of the key processes in a successful deployment. In the relationship with the customer in the process from planning to deployment, at this stage, we interact with the customer and ask him to share with us his plant, his site architecture, in order for us to understand what are the challenges that we might face. And Joe spent a lot of time describing different site architectures. And as you can see here, we can support various site architectures varying between rings and also trees and stars. Each one of them present a wealth of challenges between deploying the sensor at a location which gives us the best results in terms of accumulating the information that we need from the site, to other considerations that need to take into place, like the abilities of these switches that we see here to support port mirroring or span port for Cisco devices, and the ability also to congest the right amount of traffic, either from the variance bandwidth capacity onto our sensors. So having said that, there really needs to be an investment in reviewing the site architecture in order to understand accurately where to deploy the sensor to produce the best value for the customer. Now, when looking at the deliverables, we see a deployment kit, which is a sort of a questionnaire that is shared with the customer, and the customer gives it to us back full with all the answers to the relevant questions, in terms of where are the assets, what kind of assets are there being there, what kind of switches, etc., and what kind of playbooks are in use in order to address the alerts and events and to make the site secure. And also to deliver out of it a list of what kind of hardware or VM is required in order to support the deployment. The success criteria, of course, is a deployment kit which is available to us, and we have reviewed the architecture and made our recommendations. Sometimes it is a compromise based on situations that are out of our control, and I will explain about it in a little while. And sometimes it's a compromise with cost efficiency and time issues that needs to be addressed. And of course, out of this, we derive what kind of hardware we need to allocate. Sometimes the site is very small within a cabinet, and we will need a small fixture that will fit a very, very small confinement store. Another one will be a rack deployment in a ventilized area, and that will be a different solution. And that is the type of hardware that is being recommended. In terms of expert tip, I tried to exemplify this before, sometimes the path to go forward is to make a compromise and having minor cost in terms of putting the sensor in its location. Some of the time, the sensors are very old and are not robust enough to hold the traffic, and instead of putting them in a switch in a lower place where you don't have accessibility because of COVID, or at a higher place because of cost efficiency that you will need to replace the switch because it ran out of ports, or you need to add another switch, you need to open your mind and see the goal line and make a calculated plan in order to achieve it. If you will see that taking these decisions will render your progress slow by a month or two because they have to order up equipment, and the compromise that you'll have to do is place the sensor at a different location which will give you 80% coverage, then I think the answer is quite evident. Proceed with the 80% while mitigating other alternatives at this time. This flexibility is something that we encourage, and we saw its dramatic effect in different deployments. So open your mind in the architecture review, make conscientious decisions based on the customer's current deployment and what we want to achieve. Gathering site information. So we're providing the deployment kit that involves many questions, varying from what kind of PLCs and HMIs are deployed in your network, so we can fine-tune and understand what to expect. Are we expecting specific protocols to be discovered, Modbus, Delta V, industry-specific is for pharmaceutical or for a car-related industry. This will allow us to fine-tune and understand how we want to do the deployment at an early stage with as much visibility as possible. So we send out a very comprehensive site questionnaire that allows us to make all these pre-configuration also on the side of the customer. Now, out of this questionnaire, there can be immersive issues, blockers that will be identified, and those will need to be engaged. Like, for instance, if a certain protocol is not recognized while others is, where we want to focus in terms of getting that information. Do we have any bandwidth capacity in a certain channel that is a little bit limited? Do we have any specific networks that we want to monitor in terms of VLAN or IP traffic? Another good tip that I will mention here, and I maybe will discuss it a little later, is about IP addresses that are in ranges that in some methods might be considered network IPs rather than internal IPs. Keep in mind that OT networks, as a hereditary practice, use their own public IPs sometimes in their seclusions because they were confined to work within themselves. So this is something also that we might want to consider. Success criteria is that we received all the information required and all the crucial information, because sometimes we're not going to get everything. Sometimes our customers are very secured about their information in the sense that they cannot even share this with them. Some of the regulations are NERC-CIP in the energy industry, and other can have a HIPAA regulation in the medical, and they're not allowed to share this information with us. So we'll have to be flexible and attuned to customer needs in order to work with what we have, and also to fix and to address the blockers in terms of mitigation plans. Blockers that we reviewed are non-managed switches, as we said, switches that are non-accessible and we cannot spend ports from them. A third-party switch that are not cooperating with us. Sometimes sites are less cooperating with us because those are IoT people that are less susceptible to understand what is at stake. Sometimes the physical positioning is not allowing us to do a deployment the way we wanted. So these are some of the blockers that emerge once we do a site information deployment. And the straight out tip that I need to give is to always use what is considered to be a creative solution rather to go to the costly solution. So if an enclosure does not have a capacity to hold a sensor, we can immediately say, okay, let's get another enclosure, or let's solve this by installing another switch. While, as I mentioned before, there might be other solutions that are more creative in the sense to giving you this flexibility. So there's always the costly alternative of let's procure more, let's build another, but in the network ecosystem, we know that a lot of situation calls for creative solutions that make do with what you have. And we do encourage you to utilize them. So after we got this wealth of information, we need to do the actual deployment. And now this is the first practical slide that actually talks about the physical configuration. We have to encourage the customer participation, and this is what we expect from the customer to do, and which we'll discuss it over in the RACI model. To do switch configuration, firewall configuration, and prepare the environment, which includes mounting and cabling all of the infrastructure in order to support the sensor, and as well as preparing a working environment in case we want to do, or the customer wants to do, a localized deployment scenario. All this needs to be done complementing the site deployment kit that was given to us before. If we have this site deployment kit populated with all the information, the recommendation and the actions that need to be placed in the situation are very evident and are very simple to configure. However, you need to always remember that it needs to be done by the right people. And I will address this in a second. So the deliverables are quite evident. It's switches and firewalls configured, physical connectivity completed all the way from the sensor onto where the sensor is going to be mounted. So sensor is connected and powered up, and then the engineer workstation is ready. All of this needs to be put into place in order to us to progress to the next slide, which is to actually deploy the sensor. Now, I said a minute ago that all of this is fine as well, as long as we have the right people. And this is where I turn again to your attention to the fact that configuring the switches, configuring the firewall, and doing the physical installation pathway are done differently in different companies. The earlier we identify these stakeholders in the kickoff meeting and assign this task to them, the easier it is for us in this stage of the deployment lifecycle to acknowledge them and to tell them, these switches in this position need to span port from these different ports in the switch all the way to this physical instance. If this is going to be done later on in the life of the project, we sometimes find that these people are not available, are not onboarded, and are not susceptible to really cooperate with the deployment, and it's an issue. That's why you really need to focus on having them onboarded with this project as early as possible. Sensor deployment. So we arrived at actually deploying the sensor. We have configured the network in order to accommodate the sensor. We have installed the physical pathway from the network through the switch on a mirror port all the way to the sensor. We are deploying the hardware. The hardware is connected, and now we're installing the software. The software is being installed using one of the services that provide. It can be either on a ILO or an IDRAC, a remote management system, or it can be done using an ISO file either locally or remotely, and it is deployed on the hardware or the VM. Once it is deployed on the hardware, we go to post-installation validation, at which stage we actually see that the system is connected, that it's receiving traffic, and the traffic is valid, and it is on the IP ranges that we're anticipating, it's on the VLANs that we're anticipating, and it holds the protocols and recognizes the assets that we identified early on as the assets that we want to manage. Now, additional two parts that can be integrated into this is integrating the sensor to a central management, which I will describe in the second to the next slide, and do additional knowledge transfer. Usually at this stage of the deployment, we gather the team that is doing the actual use of the system, and we do a sort of a handover to them, demonstrating to them the UI of the sensor and establishing with them the routine of how to work with our solution, as Ariel demonstrated, how to recognize the alerts, how to recognize the events, how to create a risk assessment reports, and so on and so forth. So the deliverables are, of course, connectivity to the UI of our application, and also CLI, SSH, PuTTY is available. Traffic is reachable on our interfaces and is being discovered. Dashboard demonstrate valid data in terms of throughput and in terms of IPs and networks, and alerts and events are being reported in the sensor, and later on, if it's also connected to a SIEM like the Sentinel, it's also being propagated higher in the hierarchy. success criteria are pretty much derived from the deliverables that we see over here. And the last and final stage is hand over to the site team for completion. This is basically what we say is the finish line. This is where the sensor is deployed. And at this point, you can say, okay, the system is now working. Now, I described in a second the usage of ILO for HP devices or iDRAC for Dell devices, but we do encourage also supporting and using some of these methods in order to allow additional connectivity on the physical level in order to incorporate remote deployment in our ever-changing ecosystem as we see today. So in the next several slides, I will show you just a little bit about how we actually deploy the sensor and what it means to install the sensor. So as we are a part of the Azure cloud, our service is integrated and available on the Azure cloud and named after the Azure Defender for IoT. Once you get to the Azure Defender for IoT and complete the registration, you have the ability to download an ISO file to register for setting up the sensor and for activating it. It can be activated starting with a 30-day free trial and later on with a subscription. So from this interface, you download the ISO image that will later be deployed either on a sensor for the actual device or for a central manager. Later on, we use the image itself in order to deploy it across the sensor using either ILO or iDRAC or mounting it directly onto the physical appliance. We go through several steps of installation, identifying what kind of deployment, what kind of interfaces are we going to project the traffic to be coming from, and what are the networking addresses that we need to work with. What is the IP address of the device? What is the subnet mask? What is the DNS, the gateway, etc., and so forth. And we will receive the password for the system in order to get on the UI for the first time. Now, before connecting to the switch, we'll need to connect the management port. Depending, we here see an example of a Dell 340. One connection can be done for the iDRAC, the other one for the management interface. Each of our deployment suites with the ISO file comes with a deployment guide that details and exemplifies each of our supported hardware or VM path and gives you the exact deterministic features that you need to enable, whether IP or interfaces initially, that will allow you to configure those systems. Once you get that up and running, you will need to log into the UI of the system using the support interface and activate the product. Once activating the product, you will be able to also connect the sensor to a central management, which I'll explain in several minutes, allowing you to create a more holistic view of the customer network, seeing all of the sensors in one UI, displaying one cognitive map, either by zones or worldview map, and allowing you to do additional actions through them. Now, once connected to the monitoring switch, you'll be able to see all of the networks that are being monitored. All the assets are going to be displayed to you as Ariel exemplified in his demonstration on the UI. You will see all the assets. You'll be able to get all the information about the assets regarding their IPs, the protocol they use, who are they talking to, at what time, and also perform some logical methodical steps of checking the system functionality and see that it's actually up and running. So after successfully deploying the system, we allow the system to do a learning and tuning process, which can be a process that can take several minutes for specific functions, and a little longer process if there are additional time constraints, which I will talk about in a second, in different industries. So we turn into what we talk about a learning mode, a learning period which establishes a baseline. A baseline is the time frame in which we learn the customer network. What do we expect? What are the assets that are involved in the communication? What type of protocols are they using? When are they using it? Are there any activities that are monitored that are done in a routine process but not all the time? For instance, backups. Are they being done at a later time in the evening and only during the weekends? How about antivirus the scans? When are they done? So the learning period envelops a time frame that can be as short as a day for some of the fine-tuning that needs to be done, and as long as several days in order to make sure we cover the entire spectrum of a network activity at the customer space, but will give us a better understanding of what the customer is facing. So the fine-tuning process itself, and I will demonstrate it in a second, actually allows us to adapt each sensor, if we're not dealing with a central manager, to display the information, and only the information that is key and important in terms of security for the user interface. Because as Joe and Ariel said, we're a passive component, but we're doing security, but we're also providing a very acute and in-depth asset discovery tool, which gives you a wealth of information. And you need to understand what in this wealth of information is important for the customer. And that's why we're giving this tuning process so much significant importance. So sensor tuning is one of the deliverables, as well as sign acceptance form. The sensor is tuned. The sensor is under SOC monitoring if the SOC is involved, and any alert and event forwarding rules are implemented, and the deployment is completed and accepted is signed. Now, as I indicated before, most of the fine-tuning can and should be done on the day of the deployment, at the time of the deployment, in terms of putting in the IP networks and VLANs that we're expecting, and masking those alerts that are, every second are occurring because of regular standard behavior in the traffic, and they're of no real security value for the system. Those can be done immediately and spot on. All others might take a little longer. Now, let's review some of the tuning paths that are taking place. So we will look at open alerts. What kind of alerts are being reported to our system? Which one of them are relevant and which are not? Let's review what subnets are relevant, and let's add them proactively onto our system. Identify what public addresses that are used internally. Remember, I mentioned it before, that some of the OT networks that were used to work in a secluded network used public IPs as their own internal, so we need to monitor those as well and make the system understand that this is not IP-related, network, internet-related IPs, so we will monitor them and not report them as abnormal. Define important crew jewel assets. These specific assets are of extreme importance to me. Let's mark them, and let's make sure that any attack vector that we can run a test by will take them into consideration. Import authorized device names. We are also able to match and fine-tune the device names and to download it and upload it in the same path to give it a more significant and a more accurate to the spot system of the customer. A couple of words about Central Manager, because it's an optional component, but it has its benefit. So a Central Manager, as I said, allows you to gather sensor deployed in the network and to see them all together in one central location, and allowing you to do various actions like Active Directory deployment, user management, upgrades, exclusion rule of certain alerts that are bounded across the entire network and not doing them on a one by one of each one of the sensors. So it can be either deployed on a VM or on a hardware, installed similarly to what we've seen for a sensor, and then integrating with the various SOC in terms like in Sentinel, where we see a very strong benefit of doing an accurate analytical playbook between various alerts reported on the application layer for Azure Defender for IoT for SIEM applications such as Sentinel that provides the value that we demonstrate. So in terms of deliverables, very straightforward. In terms of success criteria, is that we have a successful integration with the SIEM and that the central manager is able to see all of the sensors and report them in one cognitive place. As I said, the benefit of CM is very evident. You can do many applications through one single point. This is the main key of the central manager, and this is how we emphasize it today. It can be done either locally, or it can be done also on the cloud, which is one of the features that we're introducing later in our Microsoft versions. In terms of SOC enablement workshop, which is, again, it's going to be discussed more in depth by Yossi in the next session, and I will not go in depth into this, but what we talk about is the ability to integrate our solution with third-party applications like Sentinel, of course, and other applications like QRadar and Splunk, allowing you to move on the alerts and events to a SOC center through a SIEM applicable use space. We do see the benefits of using Sentinel as a good use case, and in case the customer does not use Sentinel, we usually suggest him to try it because we feel very confident the integration gives a great value for the customer, and sometimes they even use it in correlation either to replace or to run in parallel with other solutions that they have today. Just a few seconds about RACI metrics. A very elementary key of every successful project implementation is a RACI model. A RACI model that describes what is the responsible, accountable, and consulted and information partner in each one of the stakeholders. Basic recommendation, have a detailed RACI matrix fulfilled, agreed with the customer for each of the project lifecycle. You can see here several examples for site deployment for every customer and also for a CM. Please note, each of the RACIs is adjustable and should be adjusted between customers. As we said, there are different forces and factors in each industry and in each customer specifically that needs to be accounted for. So when selecting a deployment strategy, we usually define them with goals, actions, and resources. What are the goals that we want to do in 2021? How many sites do we want to do? What kind of actions we need to do in order to support them? Are we going to do them remote, or are we going to do them on site? Are we able to do them remote? Are we able to do them on site? Are we allowed on site? Is somebody allowed on site? Is it accessible remotely? Some of our customers are federal and are secluded in such a way that we will rely on their resources in order to do that. Who are the resources involved? The partner, the customer, joint. These key factors needs to be evaluated when selecting a deployment strategy. So the world is changing. COVID hit us in the soft stomach where we weren't ready. And remote deployment strategy came into play ever so more significantly. So today I deploy in New York, tomorrow I'll need to deploy in Tokyo. The world has become one local space where we need to accommodate it across different time zones. the volume is a much higher, that introduces less traveling, less spender on cost that related to travel of engineers from time to time, or just to do kickoff meetings, etc. Today, we understand everything, or mostly everything, where possible, is done remotely. And that's what we're pushing for. You can gather the right people in the right virtual room at ease, regardless of time zone. So these are the main factors when looking at a remote deployment, understanding that the world is one region. Whether we're working in Americas, or whether we're working in EMEA or APAC, we can consider the world as one region and correlate resources from all of the regions together at one spot at one time. So preparing for tomorrow today, which I believe is a key function in any successful project planning. We really need to understand who will use the system, because deploying the system is all nice and well, but if we don't understand who will use the system at the end of the day, we really lost our goal and the system will not be used. Who will manage it? Okay, who will manage the upgrades? Who will manage the user list? Who will actually control the administrative rights to do so? Is it going to be the existing SOC team? Do we have to acquire different people? How are we planning to manage users? Or is it going to be by locally administrating users? Active Directory integration is very simple using our solution. It just needs to be managed and done so. How do we prepare to support site deployments? Are we going to do local teams, remote teams, global teams, integrated teams? If we do this planning ahead of time today, we will also know once we face a challenge later down the road, how to interact with it. And of course, first and foremost is train your team. Training, constant training. And I must say that also usage. So if training goes without usage and you train the people and they will not use the system within 5 to 7 days, it's obsolete. These are the key functions. These are the key factors that you need to take away from these presentations. Follow project planning methodologies. They will always prove you successful. Proper expectation settings is key. If you meet the expectation settings all along the way, the project will be deemed successful. Transparent, continuous communication. Even if we have challenges, if everybody are on board and are communicating in the same languages, they'll be handled at ease. And never lose sight of the goal line. Though the goal line might be changing from time to time, keeping it in mind, understanding and adjusting our actions towards the goal line will derive us at the right place. You can learn a little bit more in the sites that are already posted here. Thank you, Liz.